What's going on, everybody? Dr. Andrew Fix back on another episode of The Code. Thanks for being here with us. I'm sitting here with a friend of mine, Chelsey Palmer. She is one of the owners of Training Block, which is I'll let her tell you all the details, but this is an online platform geared towards endurance athletes right now that is going to be expanding and becoming a massive resource hub for athletes. Chelsey, thank you so much for joining me and coming on to The Code.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I know we're both here in the, Denver, Boulder area, but we're sitting on Zoom, which is kind of cool. So thanks for joining me virtually. Will you do me a favor and share a little bit with the people that are so kind to tune in to listen to this and tell them a little bit about you, and then we'll see where your background story goes, and then eventually what we'll get to is share a little bit about what Training Block is.
Yeah. My husband and I actually just relocated out here in May with our 2.5-year-old and our 1-year-old. We're right outside of Boulder. Loving it. Absolutely love the summer here. And we're really interested to see how we fare here in the wintertime as Floridians. But yeah, so my background is I'm a corporate attorney. I've been a practicing attorney for about 7 going on 8 years now, with a background in business before that. And I'm also an avid runner, have been for a long time. Actually met my husband at the finish line of a half marathon where I was getting my master's in Gainesville, Florida. And yeah, I mean, it's just been a big part of my life for really the second half of my life so far. So that's one of the things that really attracted us to Boulder is people here are active, find a lot of joy in being outside.
Mm-hmm.
And really you can just feel it being here. There's people that run or hike or bike or do triathlons or do all of those things. But,
Yeah.
The community is just a beautiful place to be in. And we intended to be out here for the summer, and it's looking like we're going to be out here probably permanently
For
this
more
point.
than the summer.
Yeah. We're enjoying it a lot.
I think that's happening because just like you, I relocated out here, and people that have listened to this show probably know that I'm from Wisconsin, but my wife Erin and I moved out here. I keep telling everybody 2.5 years ago, but it's not quite 2.5. But it's slowly getting to 2.5 years ago. And from what I can tell, people that move here usually stay here. So there's, a lot of people from whether it's the Midwest or from the South or whatever, who they don't go back. So we'll see what happens with you, and we'll see what happens with me.
Yeah. It's definitely not a bad place to be. Again, this summertime is being from Florida. It's a great change of pace in terms of having the mornings being in the 60s. You just don't get that in the Southeast.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, you just get
we'll
the
see.
heat and the humidity all the time.
Yep.
Yeah, and I'm totally with you. Like I do think it's kind of palpable. Like you can feel kind of the lifestyle kind of difference out here, or in some other cities where just like the activity level of people is just the average is higher here, and you can feel that. And then it's also pretty beneficial, I think, that it's sunny most of the time here. That keeps people active and enjoying the outdoors. But yeah, so was it at Florida that you went to grad school?
It was, yes.
Yeah.
I was there for undergrad and graduate school, and then stayed in the Southeast, but went to Alabama for law school after that.
Yep.
So,
I remember that part of you telling me that. What is it like what's the activity life like in Gainesville or in Tuscaloosa? I've not actually been to Gainesville. I've been to Tuscaloosa just one day, so I never really have spent much time in either of those places.
yeah, that's a great question. Gainesville is a unique place. I mean, it's a college town, but both of them are college towns, very different feels, just because Gainesville is technically in the South, but it doesn't feel very Southern. There's a good community there. I will say it's more so college students that are, just going out and about. A lot of people going to the gym, a lot of people doing things indoors because it is really hot there most of the year. But they host some great local runs. There's a great track club down there called the Florida Track Club. It was originally started, I think, by Frank Shorter, one of like the
Sure.
in the running community.
Yep.
And they still use those old singlets that have the orange on it, and it's just kind of this really really neat, just kind of background story to their track club. And there's an amazing runner that is heading it up now called Enoch Nadler. He was fairly close. I think he was in the running to go to the Olympics for the marathon. I mean,
Wow.
he's kind of an all-in kind of guy, really, really, really talented runner. So they've got a growing community there. When I was there from 2006 to 2012, really, really December, I guess, of 2011 was when I graduated from my master's program. It was a lot different. The Florida Track Club was probably a little bit more, felt to be a little bit more stagnant at that point. And truthfully, I mean, as you've probably seen, the community has built up really since that time. The running community in particular. I mean, runners are notoriously kind of loners a lot of times, and they're really loners in all aspects, in terms of a lot of times you're either literally running alone, and also you're training. Historically, they're not really working with a team of people like a coach or a club or a physical therapist or a strength, someone who's a professional on the strength side of things. So I don't know how different it would be since I left in that capacity, just because it has grown and evolved so much, and there's a lot more opportunity out there to get connected in the community. But back then people were doing their own thing. But nothing like, I mean, here you go drive up the side of a mountain and you see someone biking next to you. It's a lot different. Tuscaloosa, probably a little bit less active, but it's a southern town, it's growing, and I think it's starting to change. They have an excellent cross country and track team. They've got some excellent, obviously their football team's great. They've got a huge athlete presence there, but
for sure.
Outside of the university system, there's not many, or at least while I was there weren't really as many people. I was one of the outliers in terms of people that were seriously training.
Yeah. And that was kind of my perception when I went there. And I'm trying to think back to, when did I go to Tuscaloosa? It was so I spent 13 months down in the suburbs of Atlanta for an orthopedic residency program after I graduated from physical therapy school in Wisconsin. And one of the weekends that I was there, I was there from mid-August of 2015 to about mid-September or early September of 2016. And I don't remember if it was in, the fall of 15 or the spring of 16, but one of those, I went to Tuscaloosa for a weekend. Basically, a friend of mine had a brother flying down to like the Birmingham, Tuscaloosa kind of area for something for work. So we kind of drove over there to visit him. And that was my impression, was like, obviously the school has a huge athletic, all of the athletic programs. But that the town itself or the city itself maybe wasn't, definitely not like an active place like we are in now, Denver and Boulder and whatnot. But, I think speaking of Alabama football, I know one of my coworkers here did his undergrad at Arkansas, and there's a pretty big, like getting hyped up game between Alabama and Arkansas this coming up weekend. So I know he's pretty excited about that. But yeah, historically, I think we know what might happen in that game, but we'll see on Saturday.
You never know. It has become a dynasty though. So
oh, for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so you and Sammy, moved out here, but even before you moved out here, you were starting the process of like, where did the idea behind Training Block come from? Like, how did this even become a thing to the point where now we're having this conversation?
Good question. So the backstory is that, like I mentioned, Sammy, my husband, and I met in February of 2011 at the end of a half marathon. And at the time, that was really the fastest I'd ever run. I was really pumped up about running. I'd never run a marathon before, but I was going to use that time to enter into the New York City Marathon because I had qualified. And so that was really starting kind of an upward trajectory of really my running career. And my husband was on the flip side. He had just finished being a D1 collegiate athlete. He was a track and field athlete at the University of North Florida, which is in Jacksonville. And so we really met at a time where we were pretty aligned running wise, in terms of just having a passion for it, being really interested in getting faster, getting better. And that was great. But really about 6 months after we met and we started dating, he started experiencing what turned into a chronic knee issue. And we really couldn't figure out what the issue was. In hindsight, it appears that it was caused by being in a typical cross country collegiate program where you don't have good strength programming and you're told to run as many miles as possible, as fast as possible, with no real recovery days. And even
Yeah.
as a young adult, it still is a huge impact on your body. But he was really suffering the after effects of that, especially after college when he was in practice. He was a nurse at the time, and he was not able to train regularly. He didn't have an athletic trainer. He didn't have a massage therapist to kind of keep those things at bay.
Yeah.
And it turned into a chronic knee issue. So that was in the fall of 2011. And we moved to Alabama in the fall of 2012 for me to start law school. And his training really deteriorated because of his knee. And he had been training to break 15 minutes in the 5K. He had
Yeah.
been like a 15:08 5K
Oh,
guy, like his sophomore year of college. I mean, on 2 years of really solid training, and then had gotten injured, started coming back, and then of course, graduated and had this knee injury come up. So his training started deteriorating, and he had, while he was in Jacksonville and then in Alabama, had gone to see a few different physical therapists, and I think even an orthopedic surgeon and a chiropractor. And he wasn't getting answers to the problem. And he wasn't, even from people that thought they had an answer to what the issue was, they weren't properly treating him. Or if they were, he wasn't getting any better. So I guess that kind of speaks for itself.
yeah. Yeah.
So,
Whether or not, it sounded or felt like to them that they were doing the right things, he just wasn't getting the results that he was looking for.
right, right. And luckily for us, in I think it was 2014, 2015 timeframe, he connected with a guy who is a chiropractor. And I use the term loosely because he is, and he's also a lot more than that. He's an amazing practitioner. His name is Bo Beard. He's with the farm in Birmingham, but he and his wife had just moved to the area, and they opened up this cash pay practice. And he was the only person that Sammy had seen, even as a Division I college athlete who has or should have access to some of the best people in the area.
Yeah.
It was really the first time he'd been to someone that assessed him functionally and holistically and really looked to see what the real problem was, did a full history of a full injury history, everything about him, and really comprehensively was able to diagnose and treat him.
Yeah.
So under Bo, he was able to get a lot better. And then we moved to Jacksonville, and things started kind of going back south. And he continued to have really the same issue in Jacksonville. Couldn't really find someone that was good. Went to a couple of people that just weren't really well versed in treating athletes in particular. And wasn't really until a couple of years after that he was able to get in with a manual physical therapist that was able to make a big difference in Jacksonville as well. So through that whole process and seeing him go through that, and really seeing his goals and his dreams, I don't want to say change as much as just kind of disappear, and just how that impacted him mentally, and just the whole, people, you pour your life into your passions, right? And for him to experience so much disappointment and what ifs in terms of how he could have competed at the collegiate level, and then how he could have competed post collegiately as an insanely talented athlete. We just were kind of talking about it, and I think really more accurately described as just complaining about it a lot to each other. I remember exactly where we were when we were talking about it, and where it led to us starting Training Block. We were in Brevard, North Carolina, which is a fantastic place for running trails.
I know
Love it
right
up
where
there.
Brevard is. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Have you been there before?
I actually have some family members that live in Brevard.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. Yeah. They have this little house, it's up a hill. I always call them my aunt and uncle, but technically it's my mom's aunt and uncle that live there. And my uncle, part of the reason they moved there is he really, for his own fitness journey, got into cycling. And he was living in southeastern Wisconsin, relatively flat, pretty boring place to cycle, even though Racine has a 70.3 Ironman that happens there where I'm from. But yeah, they moved from there to Brevard. I don't remember what year it was, but I've been out there to visit them. And yeah, I totally agree. Tons of great trails. It's like that whole Asheville kind of area, similar to where we are now. Like there's a different activity. It's just a different type of place.
It is. It's beautiful, and you're right, completely different.
Mm-hmm.
I miss that about the East Coast. When you run on trails there, you just get lost in the woods,
Yeah, sure.
and it's yeah, just beautiful. I'll make a quick plug if you have any listeners that are high school athletes, high school runners. There's an amazing running camp out there that's run just so well by this family called the Whitticks. It's called the Brevard Distance Runners Camp.
Mm-hmm.
And they just play in the mountains all week. This is 3 different weeks in the summer. You can go for 1 week all the way up to 3 weeks. And I've been up there, I've been part of it. And not as an athlete, but really just kind of working as staff. And it's a great place for people both to get faster, but also just to be a part of the running community. Super, super
Yeah.
recommend it. People come from all over the country to go. So,
Well, I appreciate that recommendation. I made a little note here. I'll try to remember to find that and link that in the show notes for this so that people can easily find that.
yeah. No, they're, I'd say it's one of the best camps in the country. They're great.
Awesome.
But we were up there, in the spring of 2019,
Mm-hmm.
and we were complaining about it. And then we finally were just like, well, why don't we just like, wouldn't it be nice if, I guess we started with, wouldn't it be nice if there was an easy place for you to find people who actually know what they're doing when it comes to sport, and being
Mm-hmm.
able to find a physical therapist on the first try that
Yeah.
knows sport injury, and potentially what if they even know your sport in particular, so they know the difference between what a runner needs and a cyclist needs and a weightlifter needs, and all of these different sports where there's a practitioner who can understand, can effectively diagnose, and can effectively treat. And as we started kind of getting into it, we were realizing, and talking to other athletes, especially runners, we realized that it's really an across the board need on the athlete
Mm-hmm.
side.
Yeah.
A lot of people go through the same thing that Sammy did. And um, it can be a very defeating and lonely place when a big part of your community is the people that you train with, and the people, those are the people you do life with. Those are the
Yeah.
people that you talk about the great times, the hard times. It's more than just your sport. It's really your life. And
Yeah.
to change your life in that way, when you've got, Achilles tendonitis, or you've got, chronic knee pain, or whatever it is, to know that you're staring down a potential lifelong problem that you might not have treated is really, really defeating for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So that's really why we wanted to start it. And we really started Training Block with the idea that we would give people better access to physical therapists and chiropractors like Bo. So chiropractors that really don't just, crack and, adjust and then leave kinds of chiros, but, working with clinicians that really know what they're doing. And then we started expanding into other areas of training, including, the need for working with sports dietitians rather than just, a generalist, a general nutritionist, or a general dietitian, or,
Yeah.
and then working with sports psychology and people that are having mental blocks, working with strength coaches that understand strength from the aspect of your sport, not just for weight loss. So we realized essentially, what was initially started as a way for athletes to find PTs
Yeah.
became something where we realized that we really need this to be a community
Mm-hmm.
of really all practitioners in sport that can work together with each athlete, but that athletes may have different needs at different times. And we want to really be able to meet those needs, whatever aspect of their training they're needing to work on. So that's what we did. And then I would take hours telling you the trial and error of trying to start something like this. It took a couple years, and I had one child and one on the way by the time we really launched the first version of Training Block, which we did in Northeast Florida, which is where we were living at the time. And it's been growing slowly but steadily at some times, and now it's really ramping up, but
Yeah.
it's been growing really ever since. So
Yeah.
that's been great.
Well, that background was awesome. And I think you really nailed it on the head with, you know, this essentially came out of a personal struggle, right? And when you have that, like a lot of times people get into a career path due to a personal experience with something or a family experience with something, that's kind of how I wound up going down the physical therapy route with my father's rehab processes and then my own injuries right at that time where I was trying to decide what I was going to do. And, I ended up missing half of my senior season of wrestling in high school due to an injury. And that was the second time in my life that I had to have physical therapy as a client. And then ended up due to some surgeries and orthopedic things, and potentially being led down the wrong path by not having the entire holistic view, just kind of getting like funneled into the athletic trainer, into the ortho, into the surgery room. I ended up missing my senior season of track due to some orthopedic surgeries that I had, and never was able to run that, even though finished junior year with 2 PRs in my 2 events at the 2 out of my 3 events in the conference meets. And it was like, well, shoot, it would have been nice to see if we could have improved upon that in a senior year. But I was pretty much just cheering everyone else on during that senior year. But I think that ultimately, even though there's a big what if, like you said, for Sammy and the knee struggle that he was going through, I think it makes for there's a lot of fuel and passion behind the project, to make it really become something effective and meaningful, because it's not just something that you're doing. Like you said, this is it's like a life thing. And I love that you said when you have that network or community of people that you're training with and hanging out with, and you're just doing life. And I love that saying, just doing life, because at the end of the day, that's what it is. Like those are the people you confide in. Those are the people you want to celebrate with. And even when you're not training, those are the people that you want to hang out with. So it's just like your whole community. So you said, I don't know if you would remember this or not, but do you remember what ultimately was like that provider, Bo, that took a different look or a different approach at the issue that Sammy was dealing with? Do you remember like what was like the main thing or two that they actually ended up treating that was different than what the other providers he had seen in the past, because he had been through numerous providers that wasn't accomplishing the results?
Yeah. Well, he could tell that story better than I
Sure,
could, because
sure.
I obviously wasn't in the room with them, but from what I understood, there were a few different things. One was that Bo looked at him comprehensively all the way down to like childhood injury.
Mm-hmm.
Sammy's one of those people that is annoyingly good at everything. And so he was a ranked tennis player when he was younger. He played soccer. He just kind of did everything and really took to everything, but had gotten a few injuries along the way, I think on the soccer field, before he moved into running. So he started running as either junior or senior in high school, really competitively, and then took that into the collegiate level. But Bo really looked at some of those injuries that he had to start with, and just got a
Mm-hmm.
comprehensive history, which was unusual from Sammy's experience. Um, but really, I think the two things that stood out was a lot of these other PTs, if you piecemealed everything that each of those other PTs had all said and put them all together, that's pretty much what Bo did. He,
Got it.
one PT might be doing manual therapy, or, doing some kind of, band work, or some kind of an assessment that might be helpful, but it was really just a piece of the puzzle. And he had a
Mm-hmm.
more complex injury that needed really a holistic view of what was going on. For some people, maybe that one, you can't really ever say that there's many things that never work. there are a lot of things that work some of the time, like
Mm-hmm.
TheraBands, right? And like sometimes they can work, a lot of times they don't, but you
Sure.
can't really rule things out. So I don't want to say that each of those things that those PTs were prescribing were completely ineffective. They just weren't effective for his injury.
Yeah.
So it really was Bo really brought a lot of those things into play and gave really a comprehensive plan, which is what
Mm-hmm.
Sam was missing. The most important thing that he did was he prescribed load, which was
Yeah.
not something that most, and again, chiropractors do not typically, from my understanding, and you would know better than I do, but chiropractors do not typically look at people
Mm-hmm.
similarly to how PTs do. They look at the nervous system, they look at a lot of other, they do a lot of active release, things like that. Bo tends to operate in between.
Yep.
From my understanding, he operates really in between or in a kind of both categories. So he operated a lot like a physical therapist in terms of
Mm-hmm.
looking at him comprehensively and then prescribing load. He had that background and that knowledge of proper loading techniques and what Sammy needed. And truth was that he was weak in a lot of areas, and you pair that weakness with the repetition of pounding and speed work, and pair that with poor sleep and not stretching, and all those things together was a recipe for disaster for him. So that was really, I think, the pivotal difference, and was something that we just had never heard before. Sammy was given, I hate to use the TheraBand example, but he was given a
Yeah.
lot of TheraBand work. He was given, stand on the side of a step and do the hip up kind of, I don't even know what those are
Yeah.
called, where you kind of lift your hip up at hip raises.
Yeah.
And that's fine, but it just didn't, he would do them, and he would do them for a couple weeks or, a month or two. And he'd be like, I do not feel anything different. And it
Yeah.
wasn't until working with Bo and that proper loading and all that stuff that he really started seeing
Yeah.
difference, which was great.
Yeah, I I was wondering if that was kind of what you were going to say, or I would, I didn't necessarily assume that, but I was wondering what you were going to say, and I think it's ironic that you said, that there was a comprehensive assessment, right? Of course, comprehensive of his body, but then also the history piece, and then that loading was a piece of the puzzle that didn't happen in a lot of the other places, and unfortunately, we hear that a lot, right? And I mean, you don't want to say it, but I don't mind upsetting some people or having some people complain or something. I'll tell you that I think a lot of times TheraBand needs to go, right? Like TheraBand is not an adequate tool to strengthen people. I mean, I probably, like in previous clinics, previous places that I've worked, I probably use TheraBand every single day. Now I could probably count on one hand the number of times I use TheraBand in like 6 months, right? Because that's just not the type of clinic that we have. And like you said, we kind of operate in between in this gray area of what happens in a traditional physical therapy clinic, what happens in a gym, and we're kind of blending that whole big gap together. And I would agree with you as a very general statement, without singling out any other types of providers, except for one on our team. We have one of those chiropractors on our team who he has a chiropractic degree, but largely he functions very much like a physical therapist with a lot of chiropractic knowledge and with a lot of knowledge of how to move and load the body correctly. So, which is why he works at our practice and not in your traditional chiropractic office, because he used to be there. And his name's James Stetson. He's been on this show. If you want to hear more about him, tune into one of our earlier episodes on the code. But, James was in that type of an environment where it was like adjustment. Someone comes in for 15 minutes and then they're out the door, but they'll be back 2 days later because they're coming in 3 times a week, because you just need to be adjusted forever in order to keep the situation going, or keep the person feeling good. And he doesn't believe in that, right? He just doesn't believe that that is sufficient in a comprehensive enough, treatment style for the client. So, yeah, I mean, I think I hear the story over and over again. I had a client in here yesterday who is dealing with an Achilles tendonitis issue, and they're a runner, and they live 30 minutes away from our office, and they've been to other places before, and all of the stuff that you just listed out, like some little body weight table exercises, some calf stretching, that quite frankly they weren't very compliant with doing the things that the therapist suggested to them anyways, Well, now they're in our office, and the approach that we're taking is different. And it's whole body. It's not just, let's look at your lower leg and your calf and your Achilles and think that trying to treat just that is going to address the human that's in front of you, right? Because at the end of the day, you're working with humans. You're not working with knee pain. You're not working with foot pain. You're working with a person that has an issue, and you got to help them solve that in a comprehensive manner. So, I'm glad that you guys were able to find somebody who was able to take that type of an approach. And I think it is to everybody's benefit that you're trying to create a platform like this that can help other people do the same thing, because the story that you just laid out, unfortunately, we hear all the time. Just like you said, it's not like he was the only one dealing with this. There's a lot of people that go through the same story. And I think it's going to take a long time, unfortunately, to change it, because we need to just get this message out to more and to more and to more people in order to see that start to change, and then get that message into the schools and into the workplaces where people can consume the information and have it readily available for them. But I think over some of the dates and the timeframes that you laid out, so like while you were in, you said in the fall of 2012 is when you moved to Alabama for law school, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that was, so I was in undergrad at that time, kind of transitioning into physical therapy school right around that time. I went to like a 3-and-3 program at Carroll University in Wisconsin, because I had a direct admit into PT school. So I was able to wrap it all up, undergrad and physical therapy school, in 6 years instead of the traditional 7 years. So I graduated with my undergrad in 2013, but that school year leading up to that was also kind of like my first year of the 3 years of physical therapy school. But the first time that I had physical therapy as a client was when I was in 8th grade. And then I had it again, as I mentioned, when I was a senior in high school, which was in kind of that transition between 2008 and 2009, because it was wrestling season. There has been a massive shift in what I've seen in healthcare, well, particularly physical therapy, from then to now, right? Like the stuff that was being done 15 years ago pretty much has gone by the wayside compared to what we do now. And a lot of it is the loading, and a lot of it is the looking very comprehensively, and like the providers having the knowledge and the skills and the expertise to like really diagnose and treat things, and not just run people through cookie cutter programs and stuff. Like you come in with knee pain and you're a runner, compared to you come in with knee pain and you're a 50-year-old sedentary person, and you just get given the same things to do, the same list of exercises to do. Hopefully that's not what's happening now. I know in some clinics it probably is, but there are a lot of places like Physio Room, like the gentleman Bo, who hopefully things are starting to change, and we're seeing a little difference. Because when I had missed that senior season of track in college, I ended up having 3 surgeries on my left hip, one on my right ankle. And then after one of those surgeries, I remember I was traveling 30 minutes to see a physical therapist, even though I probably passed like half a dozen other physical therapy offices on the way, probably more than that. But it was because I had been to some of those other places, and I didn't feel like I was getting, just like Sammy experienced, I didn't feel like I was getting what I needed to get back to the things that I wanted to do. So I sought out another clinic with another type of provider, and I was driving 30 minutes to go there. I had a conversation this morning. I did a yoga class about maybe 25 minutes from my house down in Castle Rock, Colorado. And I had a conversation with a woman after the class who, she kind of joked. She was like, "Did I hear that you're a physical therapist? I have probably one of those annoying, like, stranger walks up to you questions, if that's okay." And I said, "Yeah, absolutely. It's not annoying. Ask me whatever you want." And so she tells me about this, sounds like a nerve injury that she's having. And she was an athlete growing up, and she still has this complication with this nerve injury causing symptoms down her arm. She's like, "I've been to like 10 physical therapists," and she's currently traveling an hour down to Colorado Springs to see somebody who she thinks is helping, and she loves this provider that she's seen. But quite frankly, she and he feels like they're kind of stumped on like what's going on. So and I was asking her, some questions. And I know nothing about this provider down in the Springs. It sounds like they're doing some great stuff, but I was asking her some questions about like things that came to my mind of, okay, you've been dealing with this for so long, so I assume you've probably tried this and this and this. And she said no to some of those things. And I was like, okay, well, I'm not telling you to switch from that provider that you know, like, and trust down there in the Springs. But if you want another opinion, another set of eyes, I or someone on our team would be happy to take a look. And, maybe we'll end up seeing this woman in our office. I just told her, hey, I'm not going to ask you to schedule an appointment right here on the spot, but here's my information. Do you let me know if you need anything? So I think it's awesome to have a platform like this, like Training Block, where people can find the professionals that are the right fit for them. And, at any given time, that person might change. Like you might have a therapist that you love, and for that period of your life, that might be the best person for you to be with. And then things might change and you might need a different person to kind of tag in and be that provider for you. And, I definitely don't think that whether it's Physio Room or everyone else, like it's awesome to have other people to lean into, nutritionists and dietitians and sports psychology and all the things that you mentioned, because none of us can do it alone, right? Like none of us can be the expert in everything. And we don't have to be when we have other people that can be great resources.
Yeah, you're right. And one of the things that you mentioned, and I would say that it's true to an extent, is that things are shifting. And when it comes to especially physical therapy, when I was in undergrad, Garmin watches were just coming out. I mean, it's, and those were those like dinosaur age Garmin watches that were massive and didn't really work, that you remember, like those, those types of things. And as technology has developed, things have continued to develop. But back then there were not practitioners that practice the way that you do. There just weren't there.
Yeah.
I mean, definitely not any area that I had seen. And the top practitioners, people who were some of the best in the business, were working exclusively with professional athletes or collegiate athletes. So for the general population, it just was not accessible. And over the span of the last 10 to 15 years, there has been, a lot of development in terms of the understanding of science and physiology and all of that stuff. And then there have become practitioners. Most of the practitioners that I've seen that are practicing this way are younger, are really eager to learn the new science, and are not as set in their ways. They're very curious. And that leads to oftentimes a more comprehensive approach, because they're both curious about the science and they're curious about what's going on with that athlete. So I would say that that's something that has been changing a lot. There are also so many ineffective practitioners still out there. And I think that's what the mess is that, athletes should, I really believe, and by athlete, I really mean somebody who is training for a sport, whatever skill level you are currently at, or whatever skill level you're trying to reach, and whatever that sport is, but as an athlete, you should be educating yourself on what you need, and educating yourself on the basics of nutrition and physiology and your coaching, and be curious about it as well. But you shouldn't have to have a pseudo degree to figure out which PT is the one you're supposed to go to. It has taken me years to figure out what that looks like. And that really shouldn't, be the case. And so that's really, I think, the big thing that we're trying to make happen, is because there is still a really big disparity. There are many, many, many clinics that say they work in sports injury, and they should not. They do, but they should not. So it still is out there. Training Block is a platform for athletes to know that whoever's on there is a high quality vetted practitioner that has the background, the skills, the expertise, the education that supports an effective diagnosis and treatment. If you're working in the PT or chiropractic space, with sports dietitians, strength trainers, they all have that background knowledge to really be effective. So you don't have to bounce around. Like you said, if there's something where an athlete moves, or if maybe a price point is not what's feasible for them at one point, but might be at a different point, or personality wise, or for whatever reason, they start working with somebody else. That's possible, but it shouldn't be because someone they found on training block isn't helping them.
Yeah.
It's just rarely the case, because it's such a high quality group of practitioners and people like you, that you get your degree, but you're really just getting started learning, and you've continued, the whole learning process beyond, because that's how you help your athletes out, is by continuing to learn, continuing to apply, continuing to experience and figure things out with them. So yeah, it's my philosophy when it comes to, the group of practitioners on training block. I mean, you guys are on there, from my perspective, it is for our athletes. So I hope there's millions of, as long as they're great, as long as they're top notch, I hope there's as many practitioners as there are athletes, because it gives athletes choices, right? But in terms of competition, and in terms of just, there being PTs that are in the same area and things like that, it's one of those things where my philosophy is, and what we've seen is, that there are so many, there are more athletes than can go around. There are so many people that are starting and stopping, and that are, especially once they're educated on the process of what they need, that there shouldn't be really any worry that, like, well, if they go here, then I'm going to lose this. It's just such a vibrant community, and the community itself will continue to grow with more support. People like Sammy stop running because they don't have that support. So the community dies when it's not being fostered and cultivated and grown, both by other runners and other, and it's true in other sports as well, but I'm talking about the running community, because that's my community. That's who I know, and, kind of what I've grown with. But, it's not just other runners. It's also the PTs and the coaches and the strength coaches and the people that you work with as part of the process. Those are some of runners' biggest advocates, is what these athletes need to continue that community, which continues to grow it, which continues to bring in more business for other PTs and chiros. And, so I really do think it's a very collaborative environment. I think it's a place that, people can bounce ideas off of each other. It's also a place, like you mentioned, I mean, dietitians often, I mean, I can't tell you how many times in the past couple of years I've had PTs asking me for recommendations for a sport dietitian, potentially one that has a, experience in eating disorder issues, or has experience in these different issues. And, but it's, there's a lot of cross collaboration, I guess. A lot of athletes have needs in a few of the areas. So being able to kind of work together and have that referral network is a great secondary benefit to training block too, from the practitioner side.
Yeah, for sure. And I think all of what you just talked about there is kind of like, it's like a life cycle, right? Where we need those different resources and connections. And I very much have, I think you can tell this, and people on the show can tell this, I very much have an abundance mindset, right? Like, there are so many athletes out there, there's so many people out there that could benefit from, someone being a guide for them. And I use the term guide strongly because, like you said, an athlete doesn't necessarily need to have a pseudo degree to figure out what's going on with them, or to figure out who they should see. But you do have to be curious, because it is the responsibility of you to solve your problem. Like, no provider, no matter how great they are, they can't do it for you. As much as we wish we could, we can't do it for you. We can be part of the journey with you and try to share and, teach as much stuff as we can, and demonstrate and do the manual techniques and whatnot. But ultimately, you have to be curious, and you have to, I love that term, just being curious, whether it's about yourself, about the person in front of you. And it's a team approach, and providers need providers too, right? Where I was speaking at that yoga studio I mentioned this morning. And one thing that I really like about the yoga community, at least the people that I've been connected with lately, is it seems like, and I think maybe this is because, they call it a practice. And in a practice, the idea is that you are constantly evolving and growing and changing and learning new things. And I think that's why, medicine was initially determined to be a practice, and not just like I got my degree and that's, it stops from there. I know everything that I need to know. I know a lot of yoga instructors will go to other yoga studios to take classes and to see how other instructors teach their class and what things do they say and how do they instruct people, because they're constantly trying to better themselves. I know one thing is true is that most of us providers make terrible clients, make terrible patients ourselves, right? Because it's so much harder to listen to yourself, even if you know what the thing is that you should be doing. We don't do it as much as when someone else tells us to do it, or when we pay money to get the advice of someone else and they tell us what to do. You get that objective set of eyes and viewpoint, and we all need that. So I know you and I were talking right before we hit record on this episode about a client of ours that we connected with somebody down in Florida because she did the opposite move of you and moved from here down to Florida, but she's still dealing with an issue, and we wanted to make sure she got to the right place, right? Into a clinic that was like ours, that we knew that they were going to take care of her. And I wanted to make sure that, she wasn't bouncing around going through the hoops trying to find a place like that she found here in Colorado. And, you could use a site like Training Block to do that, right? Maybe I don't know somebody in Mississippi, but maybe there's somebody on Training Block where I don't have to go through the vetting process because you've already done that for me. And I know that that's a quality place that I'm going to be sending somebody, or recommending to someone who I may not be able, to be the best fit for them at that time. So I think it's great. Now I know you had mentioned that Training Block sort of started out as like being for runners, but that your vision has really kind of shifted for it to be a bit of a more well-rounded kind of platform, and not just for running and not just for physical therapy or chiropractic, but kind of the whole spectrum of things. What do you really hope to see Training Block kind of turn into?
That's a great question. And you're right. I mean, I know the running community very intimately. So it was an easy first step in terms of let's meet the needs of this particular community. And as we've grown with practitioners like you, we've realized that number one, on the athlete side, we've realized that the issues and the pain points that the running community feels are felt maybe in different areas of the body with other sports, but it's prevalent everywhere. People that push their bodies and try to do really cool things are pushing their limits, and oftentimes have needs that result. They need care, they need physical therapy, they need some body work because they're pushing themselves, they're trying some really hard and cool things. So but one of the things that made us go a little bit faster outside of the running community is that there are practitioners like you that you have a specific skill set with runners. I mean, you do, and that's
right.
Fantastic. And that's what we've looked for, is for people that understand runners' mindsets and runners' bodies and understand kind of the impact of the sport on them and everything like that. But you also have this incredible skill set that, with overhead lifting and all of these other types of things, with like shoulder injuries and neck injuries and all of these, just there's a huge component that was missing. And so we were just like, we've got these great practitioners on board. Let's make sure that these other markets, these other athletes and these other sports also are aware that we have these great practitioners, because turns out they don't just work with runners. So it's not really serving, there's no point in not really expanding that to some of these other markets. At the end of the day, I mean, even over the last couple of years, Training Block has already evolved in ways that I wasn't really anticipating. The goal and our mission has always been to give athletes better access to quality services that they need for training, so the quality practitioners that they're needing to work with. I don't anticipate that core value really ever changing, because it's a really huge need. Really over the next, I'd say 3 to 5 years, we're hoping that it's that the name and that our brand and that who we are and the practitioners that really stand behind us and that we stand behind are flourishing. And it becomes like, our ultimate goal is really that practitioners like you and the businesses, the clinics like Physio Room, are what athletes go to first, and they know to go to you guys first. And there's a shift in the model that typically happens, which is you Google somebody, it's probably affiliated with a hospital clinic, was an outpatient, rehabilitation center. I don't want to name names, but you show up there and you talk to a physical therapist for about 15 minutes, and then they give you a band and they send you with an aide, and then you do 25 more minutes, and then you go home and you repeat that twice a week for 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And then your insurance runs out, and then all of those things that happen, and then you try the next one, and then
Yeah.
you try the next one, and then maybe 2 years later they find you. We really want
Yeah.
it to be something where you know, just they go to you first,
Yeah.
and they know that people like you are out there.
And like you said, they have sports medicine, painted up
Right.
on the wall, right? It's
It
a
just
sports
kills me.
medicine. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I am currently the one that, and it is an incredible amount of time that it takes, but I have looked at, I mean, I can't tell you how many people I've gone to see, how many either going into the clinic or seeing their websites, and words are just words. As
Yeah.
I know, I'm an attorney. Words are just words. And it really depends on the substance behind that, and being able
Mhm.
to see, just because they say sports medicine does not mean that they know what they're doing in that area. So
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, I'm a big advocate for sport. I think sport has the ability to change people's lives for the better, whether you're doing it recreationally all the way up to the professional level. It's such an enriching part of life.
Yeah.
It really is. And being active in general is just such I mean, it's a pivotal part of anyone's life and the way they should be. And one of the biggest things that changes that for, the average generally healthy person that is starting to get into a particular sport or hobby is they run into a roadblock, like
Mhm.
an injury, and they get defeated, they feel alone. You've got this great high that you were experiencing that came from this new community and these endorphins and all these cool things. You've got this momentum, and all of a sudden it's just gone, and it's worse than before you started, because now you
Yeah.
know what you're missing. So we really want to make sure that momentum can stay, and that athletes feel adequately supported by quality practitioners, that they can work with, they can be friends with. Like you mentioned, you said that you've done races with clients, you've done, it's a relationship, and it should be. And one of the biggest things we hear from athletes is that they want an advocate. They want someone they know actually cares, not just
Yeah.
is showing up and clocking in and is working on them and then goes home, but that actually really cares and is dead set on figuring out what the issue is, getting them better, seeing results, getting excited about the progress, kind of walking with them through that process. So, yeah, and practitioners that are higher quality tend to do it because they're passionate about it,
Yeah.
and, put themselves through sometimes unnecessary stress and extra education, and really these things to really better their athletes. And my hope is that every athlete that gets into a sport knows that if they need help, or there's something that needs to be fixed, if they have an injury, they have, a mental roadblock that needs sports psychology, if they've got a nutrition issue, if they've got, if they're not getting faster for some reason where they might need a coach, that they know they're not unfixable, that it's not a
Mhm.
dead end, right? It's a bump, and they've got people that can walk with them over that bump to the next level. And a lot of times people just don't feel that way because they don't know what's out there, that what can help them.
Yeah.
So that's really what we're trying to do.
Yeah. I absolutely love it. And I hope everybody that's listening to this episode goes and finds you guys. And before we wrap it up, we'll let you know where you can do that. But I think I just want to share this on here because I think this is the nature of where the medical system, healthcare system in the United States is right now. And it's just a reality. So, I worked prior to coming to Physio Room, without naming any names of practices. I worked at a different place in multiple types of roles and in multiple parts of the country for almost 5 years. And I can confidently tell you that I do not remember, well, and at least now at this point, I don't have one former patient that I still communicate with from that time, from those 5 years, right? There is probably every day there are conversations via text message. My clients now have my personal phone number. I get questions outside of the office. We do things outside of the office because we're friends outside of the physical therapy clinic. We do events, we go out to eat, we whatever. People listen to this podcast and share their feedback to me in the office or on my phone of what they think about it. And the system doesn't provide the space in the environment for that to happen a lot of times, right? Because I used to be one of those providers that, exactly like you mentioned, where I was trying to juggle 4 patients at once, and I gave you a TheraBand and said, go over here and do this. And, Susie, the aide, will be with you while you're doing it, while I'm working on this other person and I'm throwing some dry needles in this other person. And that is just not how you can get the quality care that you're talking about that you need. And if anybody, listening to this is kind of wondering about Chelsey and Sammy's kind of vetting process of making sure that high quality providers are on the platform. I mean, she lives an hour away from where our clinic is, and she drove down here to make sure that what I was telling her is actually happening in reality, right? Came to our clinic, checked it out to make sure that we are who we say we are, and experience it firsthand. And how we got connected in the first place was through a good friend of hers who was a client of ours, and through like a testimonial type of a situation. And those relationships were not able to, like, those didn't happen in the past place where I was. Relationships happened with coworkers, but not with clients to the extent that they can happen now, because we have the time to provide to the person in front of us and not just think about treating their diagnosis or their injury or whatever that is. And we just work with the person, and whatever the right thing is that person needs, that's what we try to provide them, right? And sometimes that's stuff that we can provide in our office, and sometimes that's a referral to somebody else, like another health professional that is best suited for what it is that we think they really need at that time. So yeah, I hope that you can continue to get really, really high quality people on Training Block, so that, like you said, that people can find the right place the first time and not have to just jump around and be left with this thought of like, well, I've tried 4 different places, so I guess, I'm just stuck living like this forever. And then they're just defeated, and that's a horrible place to be. So no, I think it is awesome. So with that in mind, someone listens to this episode, where's the best place that they can find Training Block? How are they going to reach out to you guys?
Yeah, great question. So our website, we're at trainingbblockusa.com. That's the best place to get connected in, and once you get to the homepage, it's a place where you can search for whatever you're looking for: physical therapy, sports nutrition. You can look for general things like that. You can also get, if you know more about what you need, if you've been kind of in the kind of swing of things for a while and you know more what you need, like let's say you need dry needling, or you're looking for cupping, or acupuncture, or things like that. You can search for any of those keywords in whatever area you're looking. So right now we primarily serve the Denver and Boulder areas, and we also have a presence in Northeast Florida. Mm-hmm. We're starting to expand fairly quickly into other parts of the country. So if there's not a practitioner near you that you see on Training Block, they will be coming soon. So that's, one piece of it. Another piece is, you can feel free to put my email address if you want to in the show notes. I do vet a lot of people, and I do a very thorough job in terms of understanding what makes a practitioner, worth being on our platform, because that's what we rely on. That's what Training Block is about. And without that, we're really no different than Google, right? If everybody on Google came over, it really wouldn't be a differentiator. So
yep.
I'm happy for people that say that they live in Mississippi and there's not somebody on Training Block in their local area yet. They can reach out to me via email, and we'll talk through some different options. There's also a lot of practitioners that are on board, especially outside of the PT and chiropractic space, that are more, hands-on, like dietitians, sports psychologists, running, cycling, and triathlon coaches, and some strength coaches that do online programming. Again, not the stereotypical programming for diet and weight loss, but programming for your sport that, really can merge in with whatever training plan you have in a really cohesive way. But we have people like that across the country that are virtual as well, that are accessible regardless of whether you do live in Mississippi or other areas that we're not servicing yet. So it's a great place to check out. Another thing that we have that's also great is on our website, we also have what we call our resource library. So it's a great place. Like we talked about a little while ago, I do think that if you want to be a good athlete, you don't want to just put your head down and just trust what everybody says at all times. You want to educate yourself in what you need. It's very good to educate yourself in how your body works, why you're experiencing pain, what if you're given a nutrition plan by a registered sports dietitian, figuring out why and learning those kind of building blocks of knowledge in each of those different areas. And our resource library is actually a great place to do that because it really compiles really resources that are just from experts. So really spans that whole group of people all the way from physical therapy to dietitians, sports psychology, but it's all written by vetted, verified practitioners, high quality stuff. And it's a great place to just kind of figure that out even before going in someone's door. A great educational tool, free for anybody to use, obviously, but that list of things that are in the resource library is growing quickly. So, if you're looking for anything from, an expert's take on what type of running shoe that you should wear, or if you're having issues with knee pain, or if there's, mental performance component of training that you're wanting to look for, I think that's a great place to start. Also, all of our practitioners that are on board, if they're not in your local area, like I know, obviously physio rooms on board, if people have a question that they might want to ask somebody and, they might want to get connected in with some practitioners that may or may not be in their area, they can either reach out to you directly there's an email button on each practitioner's page that goes immediately to a practitioner who is on training block so they can be in contact with these athletes. So they want to have that relationship. So I really encourage people listening to reach out to people to get connected. They can also find you guys through backlinks to your social media accounts. But yeah, everybody who's on training block is there to be accessible for athletes. So I would really encourage, especially people in the Denver and Boulder areas, to reach out to you guys to establish relationships, to learn more about what their training might need. And for people in other areas that we don't have practitioners yet, to both reach out to me to kind of get their feet wet in the resource library, seeing what else there, and they can also reach out to you guys too and start those relationships. And it's really a great community, and we're really trying to build that as we're expanding outside of this particular area.
Yeah. And I was telling Chelsey, you guys off of the air, that I'm fortunate to have a huge network of people that run practices very similarly to ours here, Physio Room. And I'm going to do my best to get as many of those high quality providers as possible on training blocks, so that if you are in one of those places that you just are struggling to find someone, or you don't see someone in your area on the website, that hopefully they are there soon, because we've got a big network of people that we love to refer to and tap into that aren't near us here in Colorado. Chelsey, we'll go ahead and throw all of those links and the email and everything you said in the show notes. And then, of course, like she mentioned, you can find Physio Room on Training Block. So be sure to check out some of our materials there in the resource library when you do go hop on there and check that out. And if you enjoyed this episode of The Code, I would really appreciate if you would go leave us a review. Tell us about the things that you liked. Tell us about things that you would love to hear about, and make sure that you get your voice heard so that we can bring you valuable content on each and every one of these episodes. Chelsey, thank you so much for joining me for this. I really appreciate your time and appreciate the passion that you have behind this project. I think everybody can hear it come through your voice and through the speakers. So thanks again so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was great.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of The Code. We will catch you back here next time. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.